Before LED displays existed, if you wanted to make a numerical display, you would probably use one of these. This is a nixie tube. You can see it's displaying a 0 there. Actually, it's not a tube, and given this is an audio channel, that's probably an odd thing to say. It's actually a small light bulb with 11 different filaments in there so that it can display numbers. And this one here is set up that it's displaying the time or date. If I turn it sideways, you can probably see the different filaments in there flashing as necessary. And it's kind of cool because as you see the numbers change, you will see that the front filaments, either more forward or further back, are flashing or changing. And I remember these things as a child in different machines. I can't remember what they were in. I think some scales and maybe some really old cash registers or something like that way back. It's been a long time. But I just remember these. And sometimes you see them in little devices, little clocks and other things, and I do think they look really cool. And now this one is, of course, mounted on a board sent to me by MUSE Audio. And of course, why am I talking about nixie tubes in an audio channel? Well, the reason is they have managed to buy up the last few thousand, I think, of a small Russian nixie tube, and they've put them in this. It's called the M6 Double. And it's a portable DAC amp, much like ones we've seen before, but the display for showing the volume uses nixie tubes. So you can see here, if I turn the volume here, it uses these cool little nixie tubes. I hope you can see that clearly, given all the lights I have in here at the moment. It's a standard DAC amp. It has USB connectors for power and for data, and a 3.5mm and 4.4mm output. And of that, it also has vacuum tubes in there. So it's a tube or solid state DAC amp. Input is via USB or Bluetooth. You have 3 levels of gain, low, medium, and high. All 8 digital filters for the ESS DAC that are in there. It shows the battery level, and of course has a sleep timer. And then VT in the bottom right-hand corner is for vacuum tube mode, and it will show TM for transistor mode, which is a little bit confusing because I would have thought TM would stand for tube mode. But anyway, it will show whether it's PCM or DSD that is incoming, and that's it. It's a little bit unsophisticated compared to some of the other devices we've seen. For example, if you just leave it as it is, the tubes will not shut off. It doesn't have, apart from the sleep mode, which you have to set every single time, it will not auto power off either. And I forgot to do that, and actually, as I was about to shoot this review, I realized the battery was flat. And of course, the fancy electronic view on the front doesn't have any particular purpose. It's designed more or less to sort of sandwich to a phone, and you connect via USB at the bottom, and then you can sort of tilt it up and you can adjust the volume using and see it via the nixie tubes on there. It also has a standard leather case, much like the ones you see on most portable players and other devices these days. However, it is kind of large and chunky, and well, when I first got it in, I plugged it into whatever headphones I had on hand, which was a pair of Susvara unveiled headphones. And once I put on a track with a little bit of bass and turned the volume up, it started clipping. So the problem is MUSE don't actually specify how much power the M6 Double has, and they don't tend to specify the amount of power any of their devices have. And so I sort of found out the hard way that it doesn't really have a lot of power. And it's not the kind of device you can actually plug in power and get more power output. It just simply has whatever it has, and that's it. But it does have quite a reasonably long battery life. And if you don't mind the fact that, of course, given the nixie tubes are large and the whole device is large, well, yeah, it is what it is. However, with in-ear monitors, it was very quiet and very easy to listen with. Now, this standard ESS DAC sound, even if I don't have the tubes on, was probably a little bit on the warm side versus some of the ESS gear I've heard before, which tended to be rather what we tend to call cold sounding. There was actually quite a good bit of detail as well, and given it's only $3.99, actually was quite clear sounding overall, despite that touch of warmth. Turning on the tubes, much like we've had with other devices that use those small sub-miniature tubes, was a touch more harmonic, a touch warmer, but only a little bit. If you're super sensitive to DAC quality, you probably note, like I do, that maybe the ESS DAC sound was a touch flat. And of course you can get around that if you're one of those people who obsesses over things like DSD or external upsampling, then you can probably improve things a little bit in that regard. But the default sound with, say, CD quality music was, yeah, typical basic ESS DAC sound good, if not the most high quality possible. And that probably leads to comparing it to something I had in before, which I mentioned already, Cayin's RU9. Now, compared to the RU9, obviously, it's a lot bigger. It's a lot thicker, and it's not quite as sophisticated. It doesn't have all the options, again, like auto power off and some of the other features that the RU9 has. It also doesn't have anything like the power the RU9 does, even just using the battery power. I'd probably say the RU9 sounded, once I level matched them, to be a touch more meaty sounding than the M6 Double, but it was a pretty close thing, especially once I got into full-sized headphones. For example, Dan Clark Audio's E3s are usually my go-to when I want to evaluate things to get a fairly clear idea of how they perform. They're fairly demanding to drive, and I found that in tube mode that I couldn't get above 69 on the volume dial before it started to clip. However, if I put it into solid state mode, or as they say, transistor mode, then I could get up into the 80s before the device started to get shouty and started to clip. So that means that the M6 Double is most suited to in-ear monitors or headphones which are generally easier to drive, for example, MUSE headphones. And it'd be fantastic with something like the 105 Silvers I evaluated recently, or 109 Pros for that matter. The only thing I regret, obviously, is that you can't see the nixie tubes the whole time as you're using them. I really wish there was somewhere I could kind of place it on a desk and use it that way, but with the headphone sockets at the back with the USB, not ideal. I kind of put it on this like cheapo fast charge stand so I could kind of see the tubes on my desk, but it meant that the ports were blocked. So I do wish they'd actually considered making a stand with it, as it will be a cool little desktop item to use with, again, headphones and in-ear monitors that were reasonably easy to drive. Now, the M6 Double is limited to 1,000 units because they only have enough tubes to make that many, and allowing for spares and other factors. So if you like a relatively inexpensive DAC amp, which is good with anything that's not particularly demanding, this is actually a pretty good sounding device. And it's definitely the kind of thing I would consider if I want that retro look and be able to take around with me, either using with Bluetooth or in a wired setup. So given it's $100 cheaper than the RU9, if you don't need the power, you don't care about the size, and you just want that retro nixie tube look, then I definitely recommend the M6 Double. It's a really nice device. So thank you to MUSE Audio for sending me one of these. Thank you to my patrons for supporting my channel. And also, if you do end up buying one of these, do leave a comment and tell me your own impressions of them and what worked really well with them. If you'd like to see some specific music impressions, I will have a written review on here.audio and HiFi that you can read as well, so do check those out as they become available. As always, thanks once again for watching, and I look forward to chatting with you online.